What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And we're coming to you guys after the Cavs lost their sixth game of the season, 134-114 to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And yes, they lost by 20 points, but the scoreboard might make it seem a little bit better than the game actually was. Chris, from halftime, it felt like this game was over. Can you just go through what the emotions were like in the locker room and in the arena, obviously being in an away facility and getting to witness how their fans reacted to a bounce-back win from the Thunder after they lost in Cleveland in their last matchup just under a week and a half ago?
First of all, OKC is one of the best arenas in the entire NBA. It's one of the best atmospheres in the NBA. Their fans are rowdy. Their fans feel like they're very, very close. They love Thunder basketball. They love this team. They've embraced this team. So it was a raucous environment. And it was high intensity, very physical, competitive. And you could tell that Oklahoma City, they wanted revenge, and they understand what happened a little more than a week ago. But beyond that, to me, Ethan, it felt over at the end of the first quarter when the Thunder went on a 22-2 run to finish the first quarter, and the Cavs just didn't answer. They just didn't match the physicality. They just didn't fight back the same kind of way that they have throughout the course of this season. Darius Garland said after the game, it's an old-fashioned ass whooping. And it was, in every sense. Kenny Atkinson said after the game, it was like OKC had 7 pit bulls on the floor, not 5, 7 of them, because of how handsy, how fierce, how ferocious they were on the defensive end of the floor. So it was a terrible performance by the Cavs all around. It started with Donovan Mitchell. He did not set the tone in this game the way that he did over the weekend against Indiana. He missed 6 of his first 7 shots. Lou Dort continues to bother Donovan, 6 of 31 in 2 combined games against OKC. It's just not good enough from your star player. It's not good enough from your team leader. So just an all-around terrible performance at both ends of the floor by the Cavs. They tried a bunch of different things. They had no answers for anything that OKC did. In a funny moment, Kenny Atkinson comes into the media center for his post-game press conference after huddling with a lot of his assistants. And he comes walking by me, and it was me and one other person in there, one other media member. It was Joe Varden from The Athletic. And he said, "Can one of you guys please start by asking me about the fourth quarter? That's the only bright spot from tonight's game. And I just want to start on a positive note." We did not. We started elsewhere in our post-game address, but he did get to mention the fourth quarter and how his get ready guys were able to do some positive things for the Cavs and make the score a little bit more appetizing at the end of this day. But it certainly was not a 20-point game. That was a thorough domination by Oklahoma City in every aspect of that word.
Chris, the Thunder led at one point by 42 points.
Mm-hmm.
It was, as Darius Garland mentioned, a butt whooping. You can't, and you talk about Kenny coming into the postgame and asking that. This is also the same person, Kenny, who came in to the pregame and admitted, he said that the game the other day, let's be real, Chris. He had come in saying that they wanted this one. They wanted the last one, even though they tried not to hype it up. And they were like, well, we're going to come out and admit that we want this one. That's not how you show it, right? And we talked a little bit about how Kenny had mentioned before that they over-prepared for a certain game earlier this season. That all signs point to the Boston Celtics game earlier this year. This might have been worse. It definitely was worse. But right. I'm trying to figure out what went wrong beforehand, the preparation. And the main thing that I can point to is they switched people that were on their injury report, and it messed with the Cavs' ball handling even more than it had when they were in Cleveland. Obviously, Alex Caruso is one of the best players on the defensive end. He has, I believe, the top defensive rating for players who have played at least 20 games and average 15 minutes per game, paired with Lou Dort, who we know is the defensive nemesis of Donovan Mitchell. So obviously Isaiah Hartenstein being out brings a different wrinkle to what the Cavs were planning for, but it doesn't affect as much how they were being attacked at the point of attack, which was always something that the Cavs have been known to be struggling with. And I know you talked with Kenny about this, so I'll let you go a little bit more in depth on how longer, stronger, physical teams are the Cavs' most difficult opponent.
So for those of you that are watching on YouTube, this is not actual beer. This is root beer. I went to the old-fashioned sarsaparilla earlier today, and I got like the most throwback root beer. Look at this. This is brand Americana. They had a bunch of other brands of root beer in there, like Old School Frosty, Hank's, Jones Soda. Like the old-fashioned sarsaparilla is awesome because they have all these throwback drinks. So I said, give me what you think is your best root beer, because I love root beer. I love lemonade, so I got some special lemonade, and I got this delicious Americana root beer. It is fantastic. Me and a sarsaparilla.
I mean, I wouldn't blame you for drinking a beer after that one, Chris. not to be forward.
I think, Ethan, like sometimes we just don't have to overanalyze games. Sometimes a team just doesn't bring it, and sometimes another team does bring it. And this, to me, tonight was more about Oklahoma City. Yes, I mean, I do think there is a layer to this of the Cavs have problems with teams that are long, athletic, feisty, quick at the point of attack. And Kenny Atkinson admitted it after the game when that question was brought to him. He did say, that's totally fair. So, like, I don't think this is one where you say, let's just chalk it up to one game. It's just one of those nights. I do think it brings some flaws to the surface for the Cavs. I just think OKC is a great team, and you know how many conversations we've had about the Cavs and, all the different answers that they have and all the different solutions that they have. OKC has those solutions too, and sometimes they have more solutions. Sometimes they have more answers. The Cavs tried to go zone, and OKC just rained in threes. The Cavs tried to go small because they wanted to get quicker, more athletic. They wanted to match what OKC was using from a lineup perspective, and they go small, and it turns into a layup line because they have absolutely no rim protection. They try and go big. They start the game big, thinking that they have a decided advantage with Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, and the quickness and the handsiness of OKC and just the overall ferocity that they played with on the defensive end of the floor. They kept ripping the ball out of the hands of Evan and Jarrett and making passes for those guys a little bit more difficult. So the Cavs couldn't really exploit that mismatch as much as they wanted to. They weren't quick enough. They weren't fast enough. They weren't closing out well enough. So big didn't work. Small didn't work. Man-to-man didn't work. Zone didn't work. I think there was one possession that they tried some kind of de facto box and one, and they just kind of got really, really screwed up, and Shea ended up getting an easy layup right to the basket. I think it was a left-handed layup. That was supposed to be, I think, a box and one because, here in Oklahoma City, it's one of the best media seats that there is. We're right there at the scorer's table at center court, right next to Kenny Atkinson, who is really animated throughout the game. And on that possession, I think he held up one finger or four fingers, one of the two, to say that they were in a different kind of defensive coverage. Either way, it didn't work. Nothing that they did worked. Everything that Kenny Atkinson tried, it didn't work. And sometimes it's just like that. But I do think, again, it is worth continuing to monitor. And this is the tough part of the whole equation. Like, OKC does this to everybody. It's not just a Cavs thing. Lou Dort does this to everybody. It's not just a Donovan Mitchell thing. So it's not a surprise that the Cavs didn't look as fluid, as rhythmic offensively against this tenacious defense that is number one in the NBA. And it's also sort of not a surprise that the Cavs have lost these games to these teams that have long, athletic, speedy wings at the point of attack, because those teams are really, really difficult to deal with. And because it's hard to combat that, especially with the personnel that the Cavs have. We understand they don't have the big wings. They're not in surplus on this roster. So it's not surprising that, their biggest roster flaw that everybody has been aware of, including the front office, by the way, gets exposed from time to time against opponents that's not a flaw of theirs, that's a strength of theirs. So I think it's a little bit of a complicated conversation because, like, in some cases, the Cavs just didn't bring it. They didn't match the physicality. They didn't match the ferocity. They were on their heels the entire game. Oklahoma City has not lost at home since mid-November. That is just a house of horrors for every team in the NBA, basically. I think because they didn't bring it, because they didn't have that physicality, I think the other problems that trickled throughout this game were just kind of exacerbated by that.
I agree, Chris. And I wrote in my preview article that, and I believe it still to be true, great offense beats good defense in today's NBA. And because it is pushed more towards an offensive league, right? With the scoring, with the foul calls. And obviously, after the game, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander said that he doesn't need free throws. He can get what he wants, even if he doesn't have free throws. And you got to give respect where it's due because, he had 40 points in 3 quarters, and he played less than 30 minutes in the ball game. So I think that is just a testament to what he's able to do. But then you look at the other side as the Cavs were coming in as the number 1 ranked offense, and they got just 90 shot attempts tonight. And in comparison, the OKC Thunder got 105. The Cavs shot 31% from three-point range on 42 attempts. That's not like them. The Thunder shot 34% on 53 threes. That's not who they are either, right? So You talk about having an ability to adjust on the fly and continuing to find different ways to succeed. And we know for this Cavs team to succeed, it has been majority linked to their three-point shooting, right? Against the Indiana Pacers when they lost, they shot 26.8% from 3. When they lost to Atlanta, they shot 28.9 from 3. When they lost to Atlanta 2 days before, they shot 31.3% from deep. And then against Boston earlier this season, they shot 34.5% from deep. So when they're under 40% from deep, which is crazy to think about, even though they came in with the best 3-point percentage in the league, that's where they hold their hat. And you would have believed, and you mentioned this, Chris, that coming in with no Isaiah Hartenstein, no Chet Holmgren, and Jalen Williams and Alex Caruso mixing in as the centers for the OKC Thunder, that the Cavs would have a monumental advantage, not only on the rebounding aspect, but just inside in general, with Jared Allen being 6'9", who doesn't play like a regular 6'9" center, and Evan Mobley at 7 foot. Tristan Thompson played 12 minutes. He was tied for the most rebounds in the game for the Cavs, right? Yeah. And that's indicative of what the Cavs weren't able to accomplish in tonight's matchup, even though I'm of the belief that Jared Allen should have got more touches. Because although he did turn over the ball twice, he finished the game 6 of 6 from the field, right? And that shows that he was either getting what he wanted or dishing out of looks or not getting the ball at all. Chris, what do you think about the Cavs, even though he is the 4th member of the core 4, not necessarily going to Jarrett, although it was working at points throughout the game?
Well, I mean, they were down 18 points at the end of the first quarter and they were playing catch up. So I totally understand why Kenny felt like, hey, I've got to get more shooting out there. I've got to get more speed out there. I've got to get more athleticism, more quickness out of there. I do get that. At the same time, I do think that there was an opening that the Cavs had offensively in the high pick and roll, right in the middle of the floor with Darius and Jarrett was an effective, probably the most effective source of offense, at least consistently, that the Cavs had tonight. It's just, I think it became too much of a math equation that, okay, if we're going to score 2 points with Jarrett flying to the rim, getting those layups, getting those shots off passes from Darius Garland, like, cool, that's great. But OKC's going down at the other end and they're making a three from Lou Dort or Shea Gilgeous-Alexander's getting into the lane at will. So I do think there's always a give and take when you talk about these kinds of lineup decisions. And I just don't know that there was one obvious one staring at the Cavs or Kenny Atkinson that was going to work enough for them to stay competitive against OKC tonight, given everything that had already transpired. I mean, that 22-2 run at the end of the first quarter sent a jolt through the arena, and it seemed to rip the heart out of the Cavs. And after that point, they were just like, what do we do? We're playing catch up this whole time. They gave up 75 points in the first half. That's the most that they've allowed in any half all season long. And at that point, it just seemed like Kenny was scrambling to find something that was going to work, something that was going to work consistently enough for them to stay competitive. And I think in his own mind, like, the Jarrett thing was good for stretches. The small ball was good for stretches, but it just wasn't good enough for an extended period of time to make it matter all that much. I mean, I think in a perfect world, the Cavs have more guys that look and play like Dean Wade that they could use to combat the way that OKC was playing stylistically tonight. But they just don't have a lot of those kinds of guys. And Isaac Okoro was an essential non-factor. Max Strus was not very good again. Karis LeVert didn't have his best game either. So, like, the players that they would look toward in this kind of matchup to kind of match the style that OKC was playing and match the lineup that OKC was leaning on, those guys, like everybody else not named Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen, I guess, just didn't bring it tonight and did not play well. And when you play 11 guys, well, it was mostly 10 until Sam Merrill came in, and then Tristan Thompson came in, and then Jalen Tyson came in. So essentially, if you play 10 guys and 8 of them stink, what do you do?
Right.
Like, what lineup are you going to find that's going to be a solution?
Right. And I think, I mean, it's a good point. I just think the Cavs played like every team that they've played against for a majority of the season against the OKC Thunder. Like, they had 3 people in double figures. The Thunder had 6. Like, it was in reverse. It was what they had been doing to a lot of these teams, suffocating on defense and then just finding out where the weakness was on offense and exploiting it. And you would think, like, and I don't even think you can say that Kenny Atkinson didn't try multiple different things. Chris mentioned them, right? The 5-out lineup with Dean Wade, where they tried to run it up. When you have the 2 big lineup, didn't work. All these different things. And maybe if you had to pick one, you say at the beginning of the game, they should have gone to the Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen, big on big actions more. But after, like Chris mentioned, 22-2, and then that it got extended to 30-2 in the second quarter. Like, there's no room for that. And I think Jarrett Allen
not against OKC.
No.
Against Toronto or Charlotte, maybe. Against Washington, maybe. Not against OKC. That's over with.
Especially when Donovan Mitchell, who has been known to be someone that can bring you back into games, shoots 3 of 15. 1 of 4 from 3. Like, if you're saying that you guys are playing catch up and your top guy is saying, I can't get shots on the
Yep.
perimeter because Lou Dort has me in jail, that should show you something, right? And like there will be people, and I think it might be fair after tonight's game and what Chris mentioned, you might need someone else that looks like Dean Wade, that has the size, the versatility of Dean Wade to defend how he does, but also have the ability to shoot from the perimeter. Should Kenny Atkinson have gone to Jalen Tyson earlier? Should he have tried that? I don't know. Like these are all conversations that are like very surface level after a game where they just got
Mm-hmm.
their butts handed to them. Like I think as I've read on Twitter and in our subtext mentions, like we're gonna make it like it's just another game, but it's not. To be honest, like
Right.
this is a preview of the potential NBA Finals, and Kenny Atkinson came into the game saying that this one meant more. So to lose how they did, even though it got made a lot better because the players that came in for the fourth quarter had a plus minus of plus 18. There you go, Kenny Atkinson. We mentioned the good, but like the reality of this is if they are going to struggle, the Cavs, against teams like the Thunder, the Pacers,
The
and even
Hawks,
the Hawks and the Boston Celtics,
Celtics. Don't forget Miami. Miami played a little bit bigger too.
they did
David,
they did.
David Highsmith, Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero's a bigger point guard. Yep.
I still chalk that up to the Miami factor, but
Yeah. There were definitely circumstances surrounding that one that led to the Cavs losing that fell far beyond basketball.
right. So I do think that that may be true, and but the team and the construction of the team is something that should be looked at as well when it comes to how what teams cause them problems. And as we've mentioned, I just think like if there's a game where fans should be like, "Hey, this might show you what we need going into
Yeah.
the playoffs," this would be the one that's fair for them to make those assumptions.
So here's the thing. This could be a finals matchup. It could. If these two teams play again, it could be a finals matchup. And you have to ask yourself, if we're measuring ourselves against these kinds of teams and we're forecasting a potential showdown with these kinds of teams, like do we have the right pieces? Like do we have the players that allow us to play at this kind of level? Um, and it's hard because like Max was great in the first meeting between the two teams. He was a big reason why the Cavs won the first matchup against Oklahoma City, but he was terrible tonight. So because he was bad tonight, do you look at him and say, well, if we get to the NBA Finals, he can't play in this matchup? Or do you look at the previous meeting and say, well, if we get to the NBA Finals against OKC, he'll be an asset for us? How do you view that sort of thing? And then you start doing that with Dean Wade. Dean was good. He was good in the first matchup. Scored double figures in the first matchup. Tonight he was awful. Couldn't guard Shea. Well, I mean, like, nobody can really guard Shea, and nobody could for the Cavs tonight. He scored 40 points in 29 minutes. First player in Thunder history to ever score at least 40 in less than 30 minutes. That's how efficient he was. That's how effective he was. But, Dean wasn't great tonight, obviously, but he was good in the first game. So how do you evaluate that? How do you assess that? Isaac Okoro, you look at him tonight, and he was 2 of 9 from the field. He was 1 of 8 from three-point range. The only reason why his other numbers, the plus minus and maybe the net rating, the only reason why those are going to be good is because he was in the game in the fourth quarter when, the Cavs were playing against a bunch of dudes that I've never heard of, like the big center, the 7-foot white center. Like I had to ask Tim McMahon from ESPN. I said, who the hell is that guy? And how did he become a member of Oklahoma City? And he gave me the backstory and all that kind of stuff. So, the Cavs' end of bench players were better than OKC's end of bench players, and that boosted certainly the other numbers of Isaac Okoro. But in the first meeting between OKC, he didn't make a shot either. So, like, when you're looking at this and you're forecasting to the future and you're saying, who can be an asset for us? Who can be useful for us? Like, which lineups are going to potentially be effective for us? I don't know that the Cavs. I don't know that the Cavs have as many yeses as maybe they would want. I'll just put it that way. And that means, you don't overreact to one loss, but you try and put it in perspective and you try and evaluate everything as honestly as possible. And I think if we're being honest about the Cavs, and we've been talking about this for months on this podcast and writing about this for months. And it's a very delicate thing that the Cavs are about to embark on with the trade deadline right around the corner and the team chemistry that they've built and the best record in the NBA going into tonight's game against OKC. But if we're being honest about just the makeup of this roster, they are a playable wing short. Are they not?
I agree.
One with more size than the other like-sized guys that they already have on this roster. Now, the other side of that is, how do they get that guy? Because that guy is the most precious commodity in today's NBA. That guy is the most expensive commodity in today's NBA. So there's an honest evaluation that's going to take place, and then there's going to be a separate conversation altogether of, do we have the assets required to get that guy? But I think even Kenny Atkinson, without coming out and saying it outright, for him to say that's totally fair when the conversation came up about the Cavs and their struggles against teams with long athletic wings, I think that's telling.
I agree. And we will go into different players that we believe, and we already have on this podcast, that we think could be potentials based on their contracts, based on if they are buyout market material.
Yeah.
Based on what the Cavs have in their asset bin, basically. And it's not a whole lot, right? Unless you're willing to break up the camaraderie and the chemistry that you've built. Because as we've become aware of, everybody on this team matters in some capacity, right? But that's the caveat when it comes to looking at all these games, from watching the first 40 games of the season. You have to look back and say, with these matchups, you were good, you weren't good. You were good, you weren't good. We had people, I believe it was after when the Cavs were beating up on the Indiana Pacers, and we're like, well, the end of the bench guys stink because they allowed 20 points in the fourth quarter and they made it a close game. Now they made it a close game in a different way to help the Cavs make it look like a respectable contest. If you think getting blown out by 20 points is respectable. But I definitely think that, again, what Chris mentioned, it's a delicate situation. And then you start looking, contracts expiring, Karis LeVert, Ty Jerome at the end of the season. Are those two, and I believe this is my take on the situation, Karis LeVert has proved himself to be such a huge asset throughout this entire season for the Cavs that I believe Karis is someone that they would want to keep, even if he does have the knee things that we have to keep monitoring. And Ty Jerome has been someone off the bench that has been consistent, a stable hand, as I like to say, a steady hand. But this isn't, if this team wants to win a championship, they're not gonna be having these very nice conversations. They gotta have the tough ones. They gotta have the real ones. They gotta have the conversation of what they need to win a championship if they're gonna go all in this season. I think this is the most real we've said about this because of what this team has been able to do. They're still tied for the best record in the NBA, but it still feels like they're one piece short.
Players in the locker room do not like the conversation about Cam Johnson, the previous conversation about Dorian Finney-Smith. They have made that perfectly clear in passive-aggressive ways, very privately. At the same time, there's a reason why those conversations keep happening, right? It's because the Cavs understand the flaw with this roster, and the Cavs understand not a need to upgrade, but they have a desire to upgrade if possible. So if those conversations weren't being had internally by the Cavs, then we wouldn't be bringing them to light. But it's a thing that the Cavs have been on the lookout for the last couple of years. Like, how do we improve that spot? Do we have enough already at that spot? There's the other side of this too, Ethan. You can't base everything that you do when it comes to trades, when it comes to conclusions that you make, when it comes to sweeping declarations. You can't base that all on 2 games against Oklahoma City and 1 big loss against Oklahoma City. Because, like, there are some guys that you're going to need to get you potentially to Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City is a very, very unique team in the style that they play, the ferocity that they bring defensively, the handsiness. As Kenny Atkinson said, 7 pit bulls, not 5, 7 pit bulls. They're difficult to play against. So, like, sitting here saying, like, we need to construct a roster that can better compete with OKC just in case we see them in the finals. Like, what if Denver's in the finals instead of OKC? What if Dallas is in the finals instead of OKC? Like, the thinking is this athletic, long, 2-way wing would help you against any team in the NBA. And if that's the thinking, because you feel like that's kind of where the game is going, and that's kind of a piece that every elite team in the NBA has an abundance of, aside from maybe the Cavs, if that's how you feel about it, then okay. Like, I'm fine with that conversation, and I totally agree with you. But just because the Cavs lost against OKC in a certain kind of style, and they played a certain kind of style that the Cavs couldn't find solutions to and they couldn't combat, you just can't overreact solely to that and say, like, the only guys who are meaningful to this team, the only guys who are valuable to this team are guys who play well against the Thunder or play well against whoever else you want to throw out there that you consider an elite team in the NBA. You have to be careful about that.
All right, Chris, without getting too far into the weeds on a game that I feel like we didn't have too much to talk about, I think that's where we should wrap up this one, unless you want to give them a little tease as to who may be on the block or whatever. But
well, I mean, I think, Ethan, that the 3 most valuable assets that the Cavs have to trade, and the ones that they would be most willing to even consider trading, are Karis LeVert, the future first-round pick. They also have a handful of seconds, so those are always valuable too if you cobble a bunch of them together. And Jalen Tyson. Like, those are the 3 that stand out to me. Now, how much of an appetite do the Cavs have for moving any of those guys? I guess we'll continue to wait and see, and I think part of it will be dictated by who is available and who can they afford, and who wants the pieces that the Cavs have to potentially give in a trade enough to say yes to. Because they can be motivated, they can be aggressive, they can listen, they can have conversations, but ultimately they have to scrounge something together because they're the buyer. They have to scrounge something together that the seller will say yes to. That's a whole different equation. What if Brooklyn doesn't like the pieces that the Cavs have to offer for Cam Johnson enough, and Brooklyn likes a package that Oklahoma City or Memphis could put together instead? What are the Cavs supposed to do about that? It's not like they can just keep adding different things to it, because they can't do that with their draft picks. And they don't want to break up this team in that kind of way and have that many subtractions from a team that is sharing the best record in the NBA with the Thunder right now. The other thing is, like, I believe that these games can at times become more difficult to evaluate and analyze and assess when Donovan Mitchell is just not good. Donovan Mitchell is probably going to be an all-star for the 6th time in his career. Donovan Mitchell is in the MVP conversation. And Donovan Mitchell was awful tonight against OKC. And he was not good in the previous meeting against the Thunder either. And Donovan owns that. And Donovan shouldered the blame. He said, it starts with me. Put this one on me. I didn't do my job tonight. And he's right. You know, the easiest path for the Cavs to compete against the top tier teams in the NBA is Donovan playing like an elite player. Does he have to go out and do what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did tonight for OKC? Yeah, something like that. Because that's how this team is constructed. Because that's how you compete with some of the best teams in the NBA. Like, sure, part of the equation for tonight's game between the Cavs and the Thunder was about Lou Dort scoring a season-high 22 and playing feisty defense, and some dude named Brandon Carlson coming off the bench for a career-high 11 points, and, you know, Isaiah Joe banging 4 threes to bust Cleveland out of its zone. But Shai Gilgeous-Alexander set the tone in a way that Donovan Mitchell failed to do. And when you have your star player, you're reliant on him to be consistently great. Consistently great. And Donovan hasn't in the first two matchups against OKC. The Cavs overcame it in the first one, and that was a credit to them. That was a credit to their depth. That was a credit to the evolution of Evan Mobley and the growth of Darius Garland and all those different things. But Donovan Mitchell's got to play better than he did tonight. When you're talking about high-profile matchups and you're talking about playing against elite teams and another one, you know, depending on how you view Minnesota, he's just got to play better. That's the bottom line. And I think he understands that. And it'll be interesting to see how he bounces back against Minnesota on Saturday.
How many times are we going to say bounce back for Donovan Mitchell this year, Chris? I feel like we've said it.
It's already been more than what you would think from a guy who is in the MVP conversation, honestly.
I mean, in the last 8 games, there's been 2 where he's scored, or not scored, he's had shot the ball 50% or better from the field, right? 3 of those, he's had 20 or more points. So 5 of his last 8 games, he's had under 20 points.
Yeah.
And tonight, he had 8. Against the Thunder in their last meeting, he had 11. So, like, not great
No.
when you look at all of those things and consider all of those things. But
right.
This is where I'm going to end today, and I feel like I say that all the time. We could keep talking. But I don't think Cam Johnson is even feasible for the Cavs, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, the other portion of this is, one, do the Cavs have a better matchup with the Thunder if they have Hartenstein on the floor? I'm not saying Chet because he can still space the floor and shoot the 3. But with Isaiah Hartenstein on the floor, does he take up space on the offensive end that allows them to hone in on him in the paint and crash and all those other things? Or if the Thunder end up getting Cam Johnson, what does that do for them? Right? Like, they're another team that has the assets to be able to do that. That's a conversation that we have to have. And again, that's what Kenny Atkinson was saying the other day. Sometimes there's players that you can scheme for back-to-back in games because they were both out in both of those games. Sometimes you have to re-scheme and re-strategize because someone's out, someone's back in, and that's exactly what happened with Alex Caruso being back and Isaiah Hartenstein being out. If they play in the playoffs, because they're done playing in the regular season, is Chet, Isaiah, do they have Cam Johnson? Is Alex Caruso healthy? Is Shea healthy? Is J-Dub healthy? All of these questions are going to have to be answered then at this point because there's no more information that they can gather from playing against them. So, sure, there's stuff that the Cavs and the organization can take away from this matchup, but as we've been saying, don't overlook just one loss. Like, don't look too far into it because there are some general things that they have noticed, but you also have to understand the situation that they're in and where they're at financially, luxury tax, all of those nerdy conversations that we love having on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth too, surrounding Cam Johnson, since he seems to be, the name that is attractive most to Cavs fans and this front office too, if we're being honest, because of how much they've liked him for years. But like, I'm trying to go through the prospective list of potential trade targets. Like, he's probably the best, most impactful one out there, I would say, that's realistic, that's realistically available. I can't really think.
Is he realistically available to the Cavs, or is he realistic?
No. That's the thing. Like, just in general.
Right.
So if he's the best one that is realistically available, that teams believe would provide the most significant upgrade, then you know how much competition there's going to be for him. So if you have half of the league that considers itself in somewhat contention, and you have probably 10 of those teams that have the assets to make Brooklyn say yes, that's a lot of competition. And if there's a lot of competition, that could potentially drive up the price. And then you have to ask yourself, if there are 10 teams that are legitimately in those conversations, are the Cavs going to put together the best package for Brooklyn, the most appealing package for Brooklyn, and what Brooklyn would want in return, which Brooklyn would want some combination of young players and draft capital? Would the Cavs beat out these other teams in the Cam Johnson sweepstakes? And they're legitimately sweepstakes. Like, it's hilarious. One of these accounts on Twitter, NBA Central or whatever, labels everybody that is involved in trade rumors as quote-unquote sweepstakes. And I'm like, these aren't sweepstakes when we're talking about the 12th guy on the Dallas Mavericks or something, whatever it may be. You know what I mean? But like for Cam Johnson, there are legitimate sweepstakes for this guy, because I can't think of anybody else who is realistically attainable that could bring a contender as much as Cam can. Unless you want to go down the Jimmy Butler road
I sure don't.
Not the Cavs, but as a team, just generally speaking, if you want to go down that road with that kind of needle mover and you want to take the gamble, and there is a big gamble that comes with that, like, who else out there is realistically available that's better than Cam Johnson? Lauri Markkanen cannot legally be traded. He cannot. He chose to sign his contract, and the Jazz chose to have him sign the contract. They worked together so that he wouldn't have to deal with trade rumors this year, and he signed his contract so that the date passes of the trade deadline before he can legally be traded. So forget him. Who else? Like, I just don't see anybody. So there's going to be a lot of competition for Cam Johnson. And in my mind, the Cavs do not have the best package to give to Brooklyn for Cam Johnson.
Every time I keep looking for like these fan simulators for Cam Johnson for the Cavs, and what I'm seeing is mainly Karis LeVert, George Niang, and a potential first round pick.
Right.
Like, that's not enough. That's not gonna cut it, right? Like, you saw what Dorian Finney-Smith went for, like D'Angelo Russell, another player. Obviously, they got 2 players in the deal, but what was it? 3 draft picks? Like, it's a haul for guys that, to be fair, like Chris is saying, don't have the same value as Cam Johnson.
Yep.
Don't have the same upside as Cam Johnson. Because, like, realistically, I feel like we're doing this ahead of time. Realistically, if the Cavs want to look at players that they could try and acquire in the buyout market in like lower tier trades, like we're talking about like Duop Reith, Robert Williams III, like guys that are like not getting a whole lot of playing time on their teams, have these lower ball contracts. Like it's not the Cam Johnsons of the world. We were saying this with the Dorian Finney-Smith conversation. I don't even think the Cavs were really in on that conversation when it was happening because they weren't willing to make a trade when they were going on the run that they were. Like, I just think this conversation has been played out so many times, and I feel like we're still going to be a broken record because we're going to have to talk about it even more going into the trade deadline.
I'm just trying to figure out, like, if there's anybody else but Cam Johnson that this fan base would want at the trade deadline. I don't think there is. Like, I think he has turned into target number one for this fan base.
And I don't
even see any other names.
No.
Like, the fans would want. Every time I look at subtext or every time I pull up my own Twitter, the only name that I see is Cam. I think he was trending. Honestly, I think Cam Johnson's name was trending during the game tonight between the Cavs and the Thunder. And not because there are new rumors about him or anything along those lines, but I think it's because, like, mine was set to, like, Cleveland area and what everybody is talking about. And I think Cavs Twitter was just talking about Cam Johnson the whole time while the Cavs were losing by 42.
I can believe it.
I mean, to be fair, I don't blame them for talking about something other than the basketball game when they are getting totally demolished by the Thunder. But I think his name was trending on my What's Happening tonight.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. All right, let's actually get out of here. So, with all that being said and all the trade conversations that will continue on this podcast until the date expires, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. While this is our last podcast of the week, you can still argue with us on Subtext about who you think the Cavs should go and acquire in the trade market, or come with a great idea and maybe we'll mention it on the podcast and give you credit. But to do all of this, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.